Yeah, Dave.
You got your COVID mask on?
I just came in, man. We're still in lockdown here, dude.
Yeah. So are you in Victoria?
Yeah, I'm down at Bells. Yeah.
So last time we hung, you were in New South Wales. Are you able to go back and forth still, or what's the status?
Nah, man, we're lepers. We're Victoria's pretty much cut off from the rest of the country. So the whole of Australia's in this strange position where um, they've crushed it so much that it's actually created more problems because they've gone from suppression to like full elimination. And so they're completely freaked out about any cases of it. So whereas if it got to a certain point where no one would kind of care, and we'd end up where you guys, well, probably not where you guys are, but they get it so low that they worry about every single case now.
Right.
And we're down to I think today was 15 cases in Victoria, new ones.
Yeah, that's.
But the rest of the country basically doesn't have it.
So it's funny that you're saying this because somebody just emailed me from that area, giving me feedback and kind of saying, "Look, it's almost misleading that we're being shown as like a case study because there's a bunch of costs that come with this." And kind of implying what you're talking about. What are the costs? Or when do you even start to open it up again? How do you decide when is the right time?
Yeah, well, they're bickering about that now. But it's really only Victoria where we are here. The rest of the country, it's kind of erupted into a state battle. And it's been this weird dynamic between federal power and state power. Because the states, pretty much the states without it, just put up the borders. So you can't get into WA. You haven't been able to get into Queensland. It's really like Tasmania, South Australia. The only cases are in Victoria and New South Wales.
Okay.
Particularly Victoria. Victoria's kind of spiked, and you guys will laugh when you look at the numbers because they're not really hugely significant, but compared to the rest of the country, they were. So, man, we've been stuck here. It's like we're in a leper colony down here.
When was the last time you left?
Not this year.
That's crazy. What happened? Do you still have that place in New South Wales?
No, I got rid of it.
Okay,
luckily, the lease lapsed on that pretty much as this broke.
Okay.
And yeah, otherwise I'd be paying 2 sets of rent. It'd be killing me right now.
For sure.
And because I'd be paying for a place I couldn't get to. I couldn't get to Byron right now if I tried. My girlfriend's here. She's from Stratty. And she's just starting to delaminate because she hasn't been home all year. And she's stuck in Torquay where it's fucking cold all year. And she can't get home. So
is she able to work remotely?
Yeah, she can work. She works down here anyway. So
okay, good.
That's all cool.
Well, so that's my next question is how has it affected your life being locked down there?
Mate, to be honest, where we are, you wouldn't even know. We're so, apart from having to put a mask on when you go into town, mate, I can surf whenever I want. Work for me, I work from home anyway, so it doesn't really change anything there. No one's freaking out down here. Bit of a different story in Melbourne, but it's really you wouldn't even know. Apart, you've kind of resigned yourself by this stage to what it is, and you're just waiting for it, to lift and life to go back to normal, which hopefully for us is going to be over summer. But we're stuck here, mate. I'm a minute down the road from Winky Pop, so I could be stuck in worse places.
There's definitely worse scenarios that you could be in. I pushed record right when we logged on, just for the record, so we're rolling.
Sure, man. All good.
Well, speaking of your living situation, how's your housemate Maurice?
Well, mate, if you guys think you've got if you think Trump and Biden is something, wait until you've got Morris against the entire Surf Coast Council.
So he's running. He's running for city council.
He's running for council here. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is at the end of this month. So about 3 weeks away. Yeah.
How did he get involved?
Oh, Morris is involved, mate. He's been involved all the way. So I suppose the background for Morris here, he grew up here. Like, no one has thrown themselves into the defense of this coastline in this town more than Morris. Um, you know, often it's a little, you know, he does it in his own style, which doesn't always kind of go down too well with the authorities in town. So he's had, you know, he's fought pitched battles with the development here, development of Bells Beach, which is ongoing. Like that's had another flare up in the past few months. But mate, he figures the only way he's going to beat him now is get in there. And so, he's on the ticket for the election.
What do you think his chances are of being elected?
Oh man, he'll be in for sure. Morris is
sure.
huge down here. Yeah. He's like, man, he's an icon down there. He'll get the entire surf community, and outside of that, he'll also get all the people who just want the entertainment of having Morris in council meetings. Like, I'm going to set up a popcorn machine out the front because it's going to be worth the price of admission.
That's what I was wondering about. Is he's a very polarizing figure, and even I almost view you as the opposite. Like, you're pragmatic, you're methodical in your speech and well rationed and all that sort of stuff. And he is just aggressive and high energy and it almost makes me interpret whatever is coming out of his mouth. I have to run it through a couple extra filters because I feel like he's not that he's like a snake oil salesman, but he's just got too much energy and intensity to actually be grounded in fact. But then whenever I pin him down on topics, whether it's, importing surfboards or overseas manufacturing or whatever, he's actually got all of the facts and information, and he's got like a very sophisticated intellect. It's just his outward expression of it makes me almost discount him because he comes in so hot and heavy. And so obviously in America, we have a reality show celebrity as our president. But I wasn't sure like what your local government, if they would actually be down for that version of a character, or if they want somebody more conservative and reserved. But
yeah, I think they're ready to make the jump. It's very bureaucratic the way it's run here on a local level, and pretty much all the way up the food chain, state and federal. It's run by bureaucrats. Like, our prime minister is a former marketing guy, and the political class has taken over. And I think what happens, the natural extension, the end point for that is Trump in America and Morris here in Torquay.
Yeah. Does Morris know what the workload actually is? Is he down to do it?
I think he's going to get a rude shock, considering he's got board orders through till about 2025 at the moment. And I don't know if he gets how much work it's going to be in council, but he's ready to step in there. And it's, man, like I said, he's a guy, this kind of town and this coast, it means more to Morris than it means to anyone.
Yeah.
And he will go in harder to defend it, to do the right thing by it. But like I said, like you said, his manner is a little abrasive at times. That's who he is, but he knows what he's talking about, and he's in deep with this place. And that's what you want.
I'm a huge fan of his. And we've had him on the podcast a couple of times, and I feel like he really endeared himself to a lot of listeners as well. And since I've had him on, he came out and announced or just told people that he had cancer. And I guess he's been in remission. What's the current state of his illness? And is it keeping him from surfing? Is it keeping him from working?
Well, I'll put it this way. I was at the traffic lights the other day because we don't live together anymore. He moved out at the start of the year. So he's been living in a property at a mate's place out near Bells. So I see him occasionally, but when the cancer was back at that stage. But yeah, I see him on and off, but he pulled up at the lights up at Duffields Road here the other day, and he pulled up beside me in his white Pathfinder, wound the window down, and he yelled out, he goes, it's a miracle. And it's clear.
Good.
So he's back.
Good.
And you know, and I saw it living with him for a year and known him for 20 odd years. Like his energy cycles, you know, he's just this manic ball of energy.
Yeah.
But that comes at a cost at certain times, you know, so often to his own health. But right now he's got, as long as he's got something, he's got a cause. If Morris has something to get into, and generally it's his boards, or it's, you know, in the past that's what it's been, or his business or whatever. But I think, you know, Morris is mid-60s now, so he's thinking what he leaves behind, and he's had a couple of brushes with mortality already. So he's thinking big picture. So he's going, what am I leaving behind? And he wants to leave bells behind. You know, that's what he feels. That's his crusade. He's gone in hard over 20, 30 plus years to defend it. And he's still doing it, man. He's going harder than anyone to try and keep development out of there. This crazy Winky Pop Surf Coast Shire platform thing they're trying to build. He's into that at the moment. And he's back. Yeah, he's Morris.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I was wondering, like, just with being locked down because of COVID, this is probably the longest stretch of time that he's spent at home, probably in decades, which has got to be, I mean, in one sense, it's probably really good for him, especially with recovering from any health thing. But it's got to be a shock to his system for sure.
Yeah. Well, he does annual pilgrimages. Like he disappears, like generally the back end of the year, he's gone. You know, it goes California with you guys.
Yeah.
Then Japan, Europe, Hawaii. So he's generally gone the back end of the year. But yeah, like he's had, you know, obviously had to get through the cancer stuff at the start of the year, which he's done. And that all seems pretty positive. And now he's got, you know, like I said, Morris just needs something in front of him to some kind of crusade.
Yeah.
And he's happy, perfectly happy.
It's funny. I think that's good advice for anybody who's going through any illness or even just old age. You know, like if you don't have a reason to wake up in the morning and something to go do and put your mind to, I think it atrophies your body and your mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, you know, and I think Maury would be a perfect point in case. You know, his energy levels ebb and flow with whatever's in front of him. And he probably doesn't do well when he's got nothing to get out of bed for.
Yeah, totally.
But man, he's got something to get out of bed for at the moment.
Well, the main reason that I wanted to talk to you, or that I first reached out to you, was to ask you about your book, your latest book, Golden Daze. But since then, news broke about you acquiring Surfing World. I think it was actually purchasing Surfing World. That's a huge purchase. Is that the largest purchase you've ever made in your life?
Well, when we say purchase, it's the purchase price was 5 magic beans. So it hasn't been much of an outlay to get it, but it is an outlay. Like we bought it with sweat equity, basically. So Johnny, Frank, and I. So the two of us have taken it on, and yeah, man, it came to a stage like. I've been working on it for 10 years now, but it's kind of been drifting a little free for a couple of years without any direction. The guy who owned it before us, Kim Sundell, who owned Coastal Watch, he's still in the frame, but he's kind of been removed from the running of the mag for a little while. And it got to the point where unless we kind of did something, unless it had some new energy and another life, it was just going to, you know, go the way of surfer. And so we figured like we've got to do it, stump up and what's happened this year with COVID and how surfing looks a little different this year and how people have connected differently with it this year. But how people have gone in deeper with surfing this year, that we figured, man, if ever it was going to work, it'd be now. But again, the economy's tanking, so it could be the perfect time to own it, or it could be, you know, the worst time. We'll find out.
Well, let's talk about your trajectory there. You said that you'd been there for 10 years. I think a theme that we'll touch on throughout this conversation is your workload and how to even manage workload. You're wearing a lot of different hats. And it seems like opportunities present themselves to you that might not be the most lucrative opportunities, but they're passion plays, and you heavily invest in the passion play, and it becomes a full-time job. And now you have 3 or 4 of these passion full-time jobs. So let's start with your trajectory at the magazine. What did they hire you as? And ultimately, what did your role end up becoming before acquisition?
Yeah, sure. Well, predating that, I'd edited tracks for 10 years. And so I left there. I figured 10 years there was enough. So I got out of there. And at the same time, pretty much at the same time, Vaughan Blakey took over Surfing World. And so he and I are old mates because he was the editor at Waves when I came on at Tracks back in some old geological era. And so the Blakey era at Surfing World started. I came on as a contributor, and basically I've never worked in the office there, but contributed, to that, for pretty much a decade. Then Blakey flew the coop. Danny Johnson took over, and Danny and I ran it for a couple of years. And then Danny left at the start of the year, and there it was, just sitting there. And like I said, if nothing was done, it would have just, because I know Kim had been trying to sell it for a while, but if you look at it purely with commercial eyes, it makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
But if you look at it as from a purist kind of surf culture point of view, it kind of makes perfect sense. And it was half a sense of duty to take it over.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I mentioned, it feels like there's a shift going on in surfing right now. And if it's ever going to work, it might be right now. So.
Well, you said that it would need kind of a new sense of energy, and there's this opportunity. What is that going to look like?
It's probably going to be less commercial. It's it's funny using the term commercial with surf magazines at all, because that's pretty much where surfers ended up. But like I think our thinking with it, Frank and I, is we're going to run it more like a social enterprise. Like, I don't think there's a huge expectation that we're going to become fabulously wealthy out of this. But I think there's enough of a shift out there that if you flip the model on its head and it was the opposite of what surf mags were in the 2000s, where they were huge commercial vehicles, they made shit tons of money, they were full of ads, the surf industry was booming. If you flipped it on its head and ran it more like a community newspaper, but at the same time ran it with that kind of ethos, but actually the physical mag was high end,
okay,
premium content, the opposite of the internet, pretty much. Like literally, this morning I've spent 3 hours subbing up a 10,000 word story from Nick Carroll on the East Coast swells over July. A story that would appear nowhere else on earth.
Right. Yeah.
Nowhere else. No one in their right mind would run it anywhere else. But we figure if it's going to find that kind of story or find a home, it's with us.
So let's talk about kind of nuts and bolts. If it wasn't commercially viable in the previous kind of model, how does it become commercially viable in this new model? And let's specifically talk about, I would presume there's kind of a recurring revenue budget from advertising and a secondary recurring revenue budget from subscription dollars. And then from that, you have to pay photographers, you have to pay writers, and obviously there's printing costs involved. Is that still the model? And if it wasn't commercially viable before, how does it become commercially viable?
I don't know. Ask me in 6 months' time. But
you got to have a plan in place.
Yeah. Oh, totally, man. Like we're good to go. Like the first issue is literally, we're about a week away from printing, so we're not far off. But like ultimately, what the journal's doing in the States is where we want to land. Like a committed, kind of rusted on subscriber base who love what you do. A small number of partners. Like, mate, the last thing I wanted to be doing is selling ads.
Totally.
you could not, that would be 7 circles of hell for me, is having to do that monthly. So we've got 8 partners there for the year.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, totally, man.
Fantastic.
I think maybe it's probably a bit different over here than it is in the States in terms of commercially and the cut through of these things. And it's probably easier to make them work here than over there. And so, but ultimately we're thinking small group of advertisers, partners, subscriber base. Like we sell through news agents, which you guys pretty much don't do. That's been bread and butter here for a long time, but I want to get rid of that because that's dying as well. So just a subscriber base and a really small elite set of partners, and that's it, man. And keep it, but it's a matter of scale, Dave. That's what it is. If you wanted to go and make something that's going to be huge, it's never going to work. But if you want to do something that's at a comfortable scale, that you'll only print 10,000, but they'll find good homes, then man, there's no reason it can't work.
I was going to ask if you were comfortable saying what that number is, what the scale is. Is 10,000 the right number of subscribers?
Yeah. Oh man, well, we're nowhere near that right now, but
but that the model would work at 10,000 subscribers.
We'd be killing it. Yep.
I feel like you could get 10,000.
Yeah. I think, and this brings me to the surfer thing. It's like, again, I think that's been a shock to a lot of people. And when we announced that we'd taken over Surfing World, like the outpouring of goodwill that title has, everyone was like they were stoked that someone had picked it up and ran with it. It was going to keep going. Whether we can convert them into subscribers or not, we'll find out. But, I think you just saw that rude shock on the weekend when Surfer went down.
Yeah.
It went, fuck, right, okay. That thing's been there 60 years and suddenly it's not there anymore.
It certainly makes it more real. And I think that will bode well for your guys' business. I mean, it makes people realize that these things can go away and they'll subscribe out of nostalgia, if nothing else.
Totally. Yeah. Well, we're now the oldest surf mag in the world.
50
How's
years
that?
Or what's the...
we were 62. So
oh my gosh,
we're nudging 60. Yeah.
Crazy. Well, another thing that I was curious about is, are those 8 partners? You said there's 8 partners. Are they surf brands or are they non-endemic?
Half and half. More surf. Yeah.
It's something I think about with the podcast all the time is, it's like, I feel bad hitting up surf brands. I mean, if surf brands have a marketing budget and they want to access, engage an audience, then great. There's an equitable transfer here.
Yep.
But I also have non-endemic brands just queuing up through a agency. Just like, hey, we'll just buy advertising on your podcast. And I'm like, okay, well, I only have so much real estate to sell. And do I want to give that to these brands that have nothing to do with surfing, that I don't have to work at all to get? But it really doesn't, maybe my heart, maybe I have no passion for that product or whatever, but we have to run a business, versus allocating that space towards surf brands. But the kind of additional detail is the surf brands aren't exactly queuing up to advertise anymore, and I'm almost have to like ask them for money and convince them like, hey, you guys realize we have a captive audience here that want to support whatever we promote. You should engage them. And the brands are still like, we don't have the budget. So I find myself kind of in this weird quandary. And thankfully it's not my day job and I don't have to fill all of the real estate. So I can be more discerning with it. But what are your thoughts on kind of that as a business for your business?
Well, doors open here for non-endemics, totally. But what we've tried to do is, like, editorially, we're going to position this a little different, because I mentioned it, we're looking to make it feel more like a social enterprise than anything else, that it's like a cultural social enterprise, but we're also trying to give it more of a, obviously, considering, my past couple of years, we want to flow a heap of environmental stuff through it. One of the things we've done with the partners, right, and when they buy in, they get their like traditional double page ad, old school, you know, what they've always got. But our point of difference is that we actually give them another page on the proviso that they've got to give it away. So they've got to give it. So they've got to give it to someone in their surfing circle who's doing some good shit, whether that's like a cultural project, like an environmental cause, like a backyard shaper, mum and dad surf store, someone who'd never ever get a page in a magazine ever, and so that's almost been a key to get a lot of these crew in, the fact that they can actually pass something on. And I think a lot of these crew, like you got to think that, look at the past 20 years of the surf industry, man. It's like, it's been dog eat dog out there, and it's been so competitive, and it's, you know, they've had to claw over each other, and it's blown up, and it's got to this point where there's the survivors are there, but they probably collectively want to do things a little differently.
Yeah.
And they don't want a repeat of the 2000s where it was growth at all costs. And because they all saw where it ended up, you know,
right.
And so something that's a little more smaller in scale, but super connected to the core and trying to do something good, then it's probably a more palatable proposition for a marketing manager to go, well, look, man, let's roll the dice with these guys and let's see where it goes. But in terms of non-endemics, I've got the door open, but like I'm hitting up like ethical super companies. There's like a couple of ethical banks that invest only in, you know, that don't invest in fossil fuels. And there's some beer companies that are the same, that they run a really strong kind of value proposition. And so I'm hitting those guys up with a bit of success.
I like it. I can see how the magazine kind of fits a lot of your life's interests, and it almost becomes a vehicle to connect all those dots.
Yeah. Well, you said like got a couple of hats on, but mate, the only way to make them work is if they all pull in the same direction.
Right.
So if they all
100%.
pull in the same direction, that makes it's far easier to juggle them.
Yeah. Final question as it relates to the magazine. I was raised with the magazines, and so I certainly have a nostalgia for them. But ultimately, if the model that we were working in didn't work,
yep.
And it's going to take some time to see if this model works, it could just be that the world and the way that people process information is just moving away from it. So are these things that you're trying to do best done through the medium of a magazine, or could they be done in another way? And are you and I just holding on to the vestige of our youth from a nostalgia standpoint?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone's reading Nick Carroll's 10,000 word story online
on their Instagram feed.
It'll be a long Instagram caption. But like we're quite ready for that content to migrate digitally, because it's got to go there at some time. If this thing's going to be relevant, people have to see it online in some capacity. Like, to be honest, mate, I'm just getting this mag out and worrying about that next. We've got a website that's, the architecture and platform's pretty good already. It's just missing content. Okay. So if we can migrate that across and get that moving, and get both of those things moving. But yeah, it's I don't know, the surfer going down over the weekend has really crystallized a few things in my mind. But one of them is not that the magazine is obsolete and it's a museum piece. That's not one of the takeaways for me.
Well, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion either. And I think that with anything, all that matters is adapting the business model.
Yeah. And that's where, that's where surfer went down. Like, right. They've had, I don't think, like, is really, you can't put your finger on it editorially, or it's the ownership model.
Right.
That's what it was. It's,
totally.
You know, it was owned by corporate raiders for a lot of it. You know, vampire capitalists, and they didn't give a shit about it. No one fucking cared. And whenever they had to cut costs, it just came at, you know, the surf mag got it in the neck. There'd be less pages in the mag. The stock would go down. budgets would go down, and it just circled the drain, and you can't do that forever. But if you peeled Surfer out of there and took it out of this giant American media tabloid publishing house and put it in someone's back room, you put it in Todd Pradanovich's back room, you're off again. It's like,
and I bet he'd be able to sell a ton of subscriptions if he announced that he was doing that model and he was going to charge $20 an issue. He would sell a ton.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Yep. But he's just got to get the title off the publishing company.
Right. Good luck with that.
Which I'm hearing they're not going to do. So.
Well, not for VC, like for venture capital, they have no interest in salvaging a title. They're just like, unless we see a return on that investment, no thanks.
They want their money back. Yeah. Totally.
So are books doing much better as a medium? You've picked two of the most challenging mediums to commit your life's work to.
Yeah, I'm going down a dead end of history here, I think. But yeah, it's actually funny because before Frank and I took over Surfing World 10 years ago, we ran a little publishing company out of my garage here, and it crushed it.
Really? I didn't know that.
Completely crushed it. We only stopped doing it because we were too busy doing other shit. Like we published a compendium of Captain Good Vibes, the comic.
Yeah.
Sold out 2 print runs of that. We published the journals of Peter Troy, sold out 2 print runs of that. We did a book on Parko in 2009, which would have sold out if he hadn't have lost the unlosable world title, and which cost us about 50 grand. Oof. But he lost it. You love this. He because of course he lost the world title to Mick Fanning, and Mick knew we were doing the book, and Mick won the world title. And then for the next 6 months after that, whenever he'd see me, he'd go, "How's that book doing?"
Ouch. Brutal insult to injury.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So the new book, by the way, that was my congratulations on your new book, Golden Daze.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So it's a really interesting, first of all, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading it. For listeners, it's easy to read in tidbits. Each chapter kind of exists in its own little storyline. So, but why don't you go ahead and give me an explanation for the concept of Golden Daze?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was given a commission to write like a set of biographies on everyone in the Australian Surfing Hall of Fame. So, which is 41 of them, I think, all up. And I figured, and they're all the biggest names here in Australia. And I thought, man, what can I do that hasn't been done? And because these guys have had books written about them, their stories are so, because most of them are household names here.
Yeah.
And so what I thought is, rather than skim through their whole life, I'd pick a single year out of their life and try and go in deep on it and kind of and paint some kind of picture of what their surfing life was like at that point, what life in general was like at that point, what society was like at that point. So you ended up with these little time capsules of kind of surf culture here in Australia.
Awesome. It starts in 1915 with Isabel Latham. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeah, I think we do Latham. But yeah, that's her, yeah.
And then it ends in 2016 with Tyler Wright. Covers everybody from foam makers, Barry Bennett, Midget Fairley, to Wayne Lynch, Peter Druin, Nat Young, Bob McTavish, and some lesser known culture shifters. Was there anybody that you learned about in the book that you didn't already have a bunch of information on, or anybody that surprised you when you did get to investigate?
Yeah, I was au fait with probably at least half of the crew. I'd worked with them and written a bunch on half of them. Half of them I kind of obviously knew because of who they were, but never written about. But there were some interesting ones, like a guy like Ted Spencer, right? Who is completely underground. Like he got admitted to the Hall of Fame here, didn't turn up. Like he hasn't done an interview in probably 40 years. He kind of fled from the scene, the surfing scene, like in the early 70s. like he became a Krishna devotee, took off. As soon as surfing became competitive, he went the other way. So I reconnected with him. He's in Hawaii these days. And I had a line to him, and I thought, well, you know, it's going to be really tough to get him to chat. Turns out he'd ring me every week.
Wow.
And just talk about, like, because he'd be watching the contest, he'd be watching this, and it was hugely interesting just to see kind of, you know, how someone who'd been removed from that thing, that whole competitive scene as surfing flipped in the 70s, kind of what he thought of it all.
Yeah.
And totally interesting cat.
Why was he willing to talk to you, and he hadn't given interviews in the past? Did he know your work, or?
We'd had a phone call back in the early 2000s. I'd reached out to him when I was at Trax, and we had a chat. Never ended up publishing an interview or anything, but just had a chat. And so he knew me at least. And then, like, it was a process of, and like, he still wouldn't talk on tape. So his section, he actually wrote his section. It's like it's like a Krishna parable. It's this, and he didn't like the term Krishna parable, but but it kind of summed up his take on surfing and how he was really anti-competitive, and it was a really individualistic pursuit for him to do. And but he wouldn't interview, but we would talk every week for like a year and a half.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really well researched. I mean, considering you got each section pretty concise, but it packs a ton of information into it. Not only providing history, but providing a lot of context to understand how, you know, those surfers fit into the world. It's really good. Really well done.
I thought I was cheating because I thought, well, like, this will be easy. I'll just pick 1 year. So instead of researching their whole life, I just researched 1 year. But after doing about 2 of them, I realized I'd actually made more work for myself.
Totally.
Because you had to do that 1 year really good. You had to go in deep and find stuff no one else had. But you also had to understand either side of it, what was going on.
Yeah.
So it took me fucking ages. I was on it for like 3 years.
It's clearly well researched. Like, you could tell how much work went into it. There's a huge gap between 1928 and 1960. Why?
Yeah. The war, I think. Yeah. It was an interesting area for me because really that's kind of that area of surfing I'd never spent a lot of time researching. So that's a bit I had to go back into to understand properly. But basically, surfing got a toehold at the start of last century and started to take off. Then the war happened. First World War, everyone went to war. And when they came back, you've had these two competing clans here in Australia in surfing. One's the surfers and one's the surf clubs. And the surf clubs, which are the lifesavers, which they're still around today, they're still strong. But basically they're the life-saving clubs. And so what they tend to have, they're very regimented, and they worked in parallel with crew coming back into the war, because in a lot of ways they reflected, you know, that same discipline of being in the army. And so you ended up, and what happened when the war stopped is that you ended up with police, school teachers, people are used to telling other people what to do in the surf clubs. And then that pretty much broke in the 60s when the counterculture came in and people got sick of being told what to do.
Fascinating. Well, like you said, there's a bunch of names that people already know or that are household names even here in America. But there's other, like Claw Warbrick. I knew who he is and, you know, his relevance to surfing, but I didn't know anything about him. So again, for listeners, there's a lot, like there's a lot of really, really interesting people and stories. So can we get it around the world on Amazon and all the?
Oh, I'm sure you'd be able to.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
It's one of those ones because I didn't publish it. I've got no idea where it's ended up.
Okay.
It's like, you know, it's kind of like anything. You kind of, when you're in a project for that long, you just tend to walk away from it at the end.
I will definitely post in the show notes hyperlinks to where people can get it. Golden Daze. Daze is the spelling. By the way, since we I last saw you, have you found Bret Easton Ellis's podcast?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
He's I've been on a bit of a binge during COVID and signing up with kind of independent media and different podcasts and a whole heap of different interesting, obscure crew just for, just to kind of feed myself. But he's one I haven't tracked back and followed that up.
Well, that's we had talked about it previously, and his was available through iTunes and whatever else, and then it went away. But he switched over to Patreon, so you can find it on Patreon. I think he charges $2 an episode, and he does maybe 2 episodes a month or something. But the reason why I bring it up is the last 3 episodes he's been reading from his memoir, his unpublished memoir.
Oh, really?
And he's actually writing it in between episodes. So he doesn't have a publishing deal for it. And I'm sure that he can get one. But from books that he's published in recent years, they're like more and more editing. There's more and more editing involved and more restriction. Yep. And so he basically said during the first week of him doing this, he was like, look, this is an experiment. I've started writing this, and I don't know if this will make it less sellable in the end once I kind of read through it, or maybe it'll make it more enticing, or maybe the edited version will be entirely different. But what the heck, I'm just going to try it. It's been super compelling. And not just because he's Bret Easton Ellis, but apparently him and his group from high school were associated with some murders that took place in Los Angeles.
No way.
Yeah. And so that first episode, he opens up talking about, I think there was 3 murders. It wasn't like a serial killer, but it was like 3 slayings that were all from the same person, same murderer. And he and his group of friends were he hasn't gotten to the point yet, but they're either friends with the murderer or they were somehow tangentially related to it. And so he starts going into all of these details of his high school years and his first drug experiences and his first sexual experiences and the culture at the time and how it all was kind of disposed to this set of murders happening. And I was completely wrapped. And he actually started off the episode just reading it. And I had no idea what he was even getting at. And then after 30 minutes of reading it, explained that it was from his memoir. And then he comes back episode 2 and explains, hey, turns out so-and-so actually listens to the podcast. And so they got a hold of me and they were pissed because I talked about he and I having a sexual experience together, and he's now married with 3 kids. And he changed the names and all of that. So it wasn't like he was directly implicating anybody, but him even like pulling the curtain back was fascinating. Yeah. And so today he released the 3rd episode, and I was listening to it before you and I got on this, but I was just thinking, I don't know that any author has ever done anything like this before. Like while he's writing it, going on air every other week and kind of getting real-time feedback.
Like a real-time memoir. Yeah. It sounds like, because I'm a huge Elroy fan. It sounds a lot like the Elroy thing where Elroy's mother was murdered when he was a kid, and so he wrote a memoir about that. But also that experience and also it was kind of more or less became the background for all of his novels after that. And it feels like, Easton Ellis has done something similar. It's
for sure. Well, that's what's interesting now in hindsight is kind of looking back at those early novels, because a lot of them, and he even admits, were semi-autobiographical, or at least drawing from themes in his life. So now kind of filling in the actual story and going back and looking at that stuff is fascinating.
Yeah, I'll check it out for sure, because it's that Elroy thing, because I'm a mad James Elroy fan, and that, because when he published that memoir, I think the year before last it was, then you look, suddenly all his novels, you looked at them and go, whoa, hang on, it's like, okay, that's where it comes from.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, you can find him on Patreon, and if you sign up, I think he just sends you like this RSS feed that you add into iTunes, and then iTunes automatically, downloads it like it would a regular podcast. You just have to get that private feed.
Sure.
Um,
Well, it looks like I've got another couple of months on my hands here. So,
right. Last time we talked, we were talking about you were recently kind of catapulted into social media celebrity status as the tip of the spear fighting for the bite against Equinor. That campaign worked and Equinor ultimately withdrew. What is the update since then?
yeah. We got the shock of our lives, really, because we were resigned to the fact that was going ahead. And it wasn't till, we got a call out of the blue in February this year that they'd actually pulled out. And so we were just like, fuck, righto, okay, let's go. And then COVID happened. So we had all this energy and we had all these crew ready to go. This, if I don't know how closely your listenership kind of knows what's going on in Australia, but there's a huge fossil fuel expansion going on here. It's pretty much under the cover of COVID now. They've had to use COVID as a foot in the door to get a whole heap of new stuff started. So we're kind of positioned, ready to have a run at that. So we got to the end of the Equinor thing and went, fuck rudder, all these people want to keep going and we needed like something else. So what we did is I jumped in and joined the board at Surfrider here because it basically needed some kind of framework to hang off. Once that issue disappeared, it needed a framework that we could organize, get ourselves organized and just point it in the direction of any crazy shit that was going down.
Right.
Which is where Damo Cole and myself kind of both joined on, which is kind of where we're at now, where we've kind of spent the year spinning our wheels a little bit because we just haven't been able to get out.
Right.
And it's frustrating because at the same time we haven't been able to get out, and it's cause and effect here. All these fossil fuel companies have just gone, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the government's fast-tracked all this development right around the coast. Like there's a gas field going in off Sydney. As crazy as that sounds.
So they're all still working throughout COVID?
Yep. Well, mate, these guys never sleep. The lobby groups never sleep. So they've been, and obviously there's a huge imperative for the government now to get the economy moving. And so there's this huge ideological debate going down here in this country about the direction that needs to go. The crew in charge have just gone straight up, who are bought and sold and owned by the fossil fuel lobby, have just gone, well, it's going to be a gas-led recovery. So we're going to invest all this taxpayer money into gas infrastructure, and we're going to help out our mates in the fossil fuel industry and set the planet on fire while we're doing it. So
it's I feel like there's almost a burden that you carry because you were kind of the lead of the fight for the bite. So now people expect you to be the lead for all environmental activism. But the reality is you can't know everything about everything.
No.
And I mean, you studied up a ton with that one thing and that became your life's work for a bit. But how do you just pivot from that to the next thing? What's your responsibility there?
Well, sadly, there's atrocities everywhere.
Right.
Like, there's all sorts of stuff going down. And you can't just, you can't go after everything because you'll just burn yourself out. And I think it's a common thing in the environmental industry, the movement is that people just cook themselves.
Totally.
Because they're so, they're so passionately attached to these things. And more often than not, you lose.
Right.
Even when you win, they're not wins because all you've done is delay something. You kicked it down the road a little bit and someone will circle back and have another go at it. So it's a thankless kind of job. But, we just took huge, we looked around at what was happening and the shift in those bite protests and just gone, man, this is something that if we could keep this rolling, and I think particularly here in Australia where if you can, the reason they couldn't dismiss those bike protests was because the Australian way of life is so hinged around the coast and coastal living and the beach as a way of life that it's, it made it really difficult for them to attack. It's easy to kind of to characterize people as, dreadlocked, fringe, green freak. But when people, mums and dads from the beach start turning up to protest, like, you got a problem. And so we just figured if we can keep that moving, then, we could probably do some good. And all the population and all the money's on the coast. So we can kind of tap into that consciousness there and get that kind of doing some kind of good and pushing back against all this bullshit, then all power, it could do something.
Not to be cynical, but I'm curious, was Equinor's withdrawal related to the protests, or was it related to just a financial decision? Like, they got to a point in their development where they just realized it wasn't fiscally, feasible for them to proceed, and they backed out for that reason.
Yep. I'm sure it's a bit of column A, column B. Okay. Totally. Like, they publicly, they said it was commercial, the reason they pulled out.
Yeah.
But you also look at how far down the track they were with it. And also, these things are, these projects, they're 50-year projects. So you can say that, they looked at COVID coming and forecast against that, but they'd also forecast 50 years down the track and figured it was still a good idea. And they dropped millions in getting as far as they did. But I think what really kicked them in the nuts was we got the protest back into Norway, and because that company is 2/3 state owned. Yeah. And so as soon as the Norwegian people started turning on them a bit, that really flipped it. And I think they just looked at the potential for more trouble here in Australia that would migrate back to Norway and put it in the too hard basket and just said, well, let's go and drill in, Brazil.
Yeah, exactly.
Just go to some third world country. We'll go somewhere where no one's going to give a shit and just drill there. So.
Right. Well, congrats on that success, nevertheless. What is your role with Patagonia?
Yeah, good question. I've had about 20 different job titles. It's the same job, but essentially it's kind of like a nexus between their environmental campaign stuff, their surf team, their kind of comms, public relations. It fits in the middle of all of that, really. And it's got a life of its own. Like, it's followed the bite thing, spun off out of that. And so again, they all kind of conflate and push in together. But interesting, yeah, super interesting company. It's been a real eye opener for me to work with those guys.
You did the film what was the film? Was it with Heath Josky?
Yeah, Nevertown. Yeah,
Nevertown. That's what it was. Yeah. I think it's a great opportunity to exercise that, like, just to have the opportunity to produce films is a great to add that to your repertoire of things that you're doing. I think that fits in really nicely too.
I was just happy I could get a Midnight Oil track on the soundtrack.
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah.
Is that a budgetary concern? Does Patagonia have to pay for that? It
was at the time.
Yeah.
Because Midnight Oil don't own any of their music. So you've got to pay the publishing company.
Oh, really?
And they didn't cut us any slack, even though we were making an environmental film. But it was worth doing.
Didn't they have a track in that new Rip Curl film, the Morgan film?
Yes, they did. Was it Only the Strong? They did.
Yeah, I think they did.
But they were huge like that. And I don't know how much you guys saw them when they were in their heyday through the 80s. But they're like the godfathers of they brought the environmental movement into like a wider kind of social context here in this country. Yeah. They were, and Peter Garrett in the environmental. He's an absolute guru in this country.
Awesome. Well, kind of shifting a little bit, you have a piece that's publishing in Surfer magazine. So is this going to be the final issue of Surfer, or how does this work?
Well, I wasn't aware at the time, but apparently it is. Yeah.
Is it going to ever make it to people's doorsteps?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen it an issue for a little while now, but apparently it's in there. So
okay. Well,
yeah.
And before we get into that piece, because I do want to talk to you about that, how do you decide what you're a writer? How do you decide what goes on Surfer Mag, what goes to Surfing World?
Yeah, good question. Todd kind of threw me that commission with this one, and I don't know, and I haven't spoke to Todd since Sunday, so I don't know whether he knew that was going to be it. That was going to be a sign off. But he threw me the commission, and the essence, he asked me to look at what this year means potentially for pro surfing.
That's a really timely article to end up in the final issue. Makes me think that maybe Todd had an idea of what was coming down the pike. So is the piece is essentially about the future of the tour itself, right? About professional surfing. And what did you write?
I kind of looked at the historical context of what was happening, because I've been thinking a lot about it this year. We've been down here and we had this amazing run of surf through autumn here, where I surfed every day for 8 weeks. At the start of COVID, we weren't locked down. We were free to surf. The surf pumped. Everyone just went completely nuts for just weeks on end. Half the crew weren't working. Everyone was buying new boards. The surf pumped. But there was no travel. There was no pro surfing. There was nothing that exists outside the act of just a surfer, a board, and a wave. That's what it was for weeks on end. And I think in my head and it crystallized during the Easter weekend here, which pumped again. And of course, the Easter weekend here at Bells is generally the event. And it just, looked at from the Winky Pop, I just go, man, this is another world right here. There's no pro surfing, but look what it is. And I think I kind of thought that what this year is going to do, and if this year becomes another year, what it's going to do to the consciousness of people around, whether they need it, how it fits in. And I went back to look at how competitive surfing, and it's a yin and yang thing. Those two are like competing forces, competitive surfing and free surfing, and they've been at each other for years. And there'll be a power balance where the dynamic will change, where it'll be all about contest surfing. But then you look at kind of what's happening now, and you go, well, what's going to come out the other side of this? Is it going to matter as much to people as it did before? How much did it mean to people before? I think you could probably say you had a high point probably through the 2000s where it really did mean a lot. But it's really, you don't know where it's going to land on the other side of this. When it starts up again, who's going to care? Maybe everyone will, but it feels like it's at a turning point for something. Something's going to give.
Do you have any predictions for what the tour would look like when it comes back?
I'm convinced the WSL will hang in to the point of getting it going again. But what happens once it does is going to be the question. Because if it doesn't get traction, what is it now? 7 years they've been in there, and it's, I don't know what your assessment of how successful it's been in getting that traction into some kind of mainstream audience and building it into some kind of sport that can, is in the same postcode as some of the bigger sports. I don't think it's there. It's probably done a bit of damage along the way to the audience it did have, who would have been there. And like, you could probably equate it to the magazines,
Yeah, you can.
And to the surf industry.
Yep.
Yeah. You're so ambitious and want to go to so many people and you alienate the crew who actually do care about it at the same time. And there might just be a natural size for it, you know, which isn't this gigantic global flashing light sport. Maybe it is something smaller. And I use a historical context with this. Like, you went back, I started this piece at the 1970 World Titles, which were down here at Bells. And you'd had like these competitive years, and you'd had these world contests where everyone showed up to them since, you know, the first one was 64, and 64 had 60,000 people at Manly. It was that huge deal. But by 1970, no one gave a shit, including the guys in the contest, you know. Like my mate Ted Spencer, the day before the contest started down here, he got up and left. He just took off.
Crazy.
And half the crew didn't want to be here. And that was that thing where already that, and what, like Wayne Lynch was about to leave, Nat was about to leave, all these crew were leaving, and the last thing they wanted to do was compete. And it was just, it's that, again, that yin and yang between competitive surfing and just surfing.
Yeah.
That was one of those points back then, and we probably landed at another one right now.
Did you, or do you have regular contact with anybody at the WSL, and did you talk to them before writing this piece?
Yep. I interviewed Pat a couple of weeks before, but and that was in regard to the new tour and the restructured 21 tour that they've got together, which, like, to be honest, looks fucking great. You know, structurally, there's a lot of stuff they've done with that should have been done probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a bit of hope that they've listened, and that this might work, because they've made some changes. But there was no sense talking to those guys about the future of the tour, because you're only going to get you'll get the company line.
Yeah.
You kind of, really it rests at the whim of one man. And, you know, Dirk could get out of bed one morning, decide it's over, and that's it.
Do you feel confident in the leadership? I mean, you said one man, which is Dirk, but ultimately the one who's kind of responsible for implementing the change and direction is Eric Logan, the CEO. Do you feel confident in his leadership to do these things that need to get done to make it a viable business, or even to appease our needs as the core audience? Yeah.
I think, like, Elo aside, I think what they've got planned, and the look at the tour for next year is it's pretty close to what it could have been in the 2000s. You know, there's elements, like, you look at that run home of the 21 tour, if it happens, where it goes G-Land, J-Bay, Chopu, and then whatever this final is, and go, well, that's kind of okay. That's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
If they got that, so structurally, I think it's fine, but again, it's a question of ownership. It's like the magazines. If it doesn't have a sympathetic owner that isn't going to see it, it's that business passion kind of needle. If the needle flicks too much to business, he realizes he's done a ton of money on it and just goes, well, we can't do this anymore, then it's probably going to wind up. But if he sticks around, who knows? But I do think it's better off. They need to scale back their ambition and make it something that just appeals more to a core audience, I think.
So you're saying the big improvement, the one big improvement, good thing that they've made about a decade too late, was running in good waves, running at the best surf spots in the world during the right months. That's their big unlock. Shocking. Shocking.
Who'd believe it, huh?
Amazing. Crazy. It only took them this long to figure that one out.
And halving the field.
Yeah, exactly. So a few thoughts that I have in relation to what you just said.
Yep.
It is a forced fit. Competitive surfing versus just surfing is a forced fit. And I'm okay with it, because I understand the human desire to want to compare things and to say that this person's better than that person or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I get all of that. What I think that we've suffered as a consequence is a homogenization. Like everybody ends up riding pointy thruster, the exact same type of surfboards, pointy thrusters, trying to do the exact same things, because by the nature of doing that, you're creating an objective judging criteria. So now these aren't individuals expressing their individuality. These are people all on the same equipment surfing to this key goal over here. So everything becomes homogenous. And I think, like, when I think about an argument for competitive surfing, I think progression. Like, wow, surfing advances because guys are doing crazier airs. But then there's a counter argument against that, which is, who knows how much progression we would have had through the 90s and the 2000s when competitive surfing was really successful, had we not all been forced to ride high performance thrusters and try to surf the way that Kelly Slater was surfing. Like, if everybody was just left to be Craig Anderson or Rostovich or whoever else, like, it could have expanded into crazy ways, you know, like looking at Tom Kern riding skimboards. Like, there's no limit to the imagination of ways that it could have progressed, and we define progress entirely differently. So when I think about that, I don't see as much value in the competitive model. And I also like the idea of like the best characters that we've ever had in surfing, the best personalities, have nothing to do with competitive surfing. You know, like, they are Mickey Dora or whoever it is, that are just, they're counterculture people living their kind of fullest expression of their personality. And any version of competition tamps that down. And so I was super into competitive surfing last year and every year before, and I really do enjoy it. And I thought that I missed it. But to your original kind of question, the more I think about it, the less I miss it.
Yeah.
If it comes back, I might watch it, but I don't know that I'll miss it.
Like, it's on right now.
Oh, that's right. One of the Australian events is on, isn't it? Where is it? Stratty?
It's at South Stratty. Yeah. I watched it and I've gone, oh, look, they must have flown Tyler Allen over here and he's doing his hockey impersonation. I realized it actually was hockey.
What happened to Tyler Allen? Is he still around?
I don't know. But
I need more of him.
It's funny though. It's like the comparative paradigm, obviously, through the long course of human history, has kind of advanced a lot of shit. And you know, I was actually thinking about this when I thought about kind of what it meant that when Surfer had folded, and because obviously, you know, there's an instant dismissal from everyone going, well, that's just, you know, that's the changing times. That's what it is. And what do you lose by that? You know, you've got the internet, you've got all these voices, new voices, and everything, which is great. But then, you know, I kind of thought, well, what happens when you break that lineage? You know, there's a nostalgic aspect. You lose something that's 60 years old. But I thought, in terms of actually what it does at the contemporary end, it's like, you know, who a guy I thought of straight away, Scott Eichner.
Yeah.
When I think of surfer, and I think of surf mags and surf photography, I think like Scott Eichner in the 2000s was a fucking giant. Like, what he was able to do with surf photography and just the development of it. And that was all done under the patronage of Surfer, you know? So he did all that, you know, all those landmark pipe shots, all of that, took surf photography to a place that it would never have gone if he didn't have a paycheck from Surfer. And then what happened when those paychecks disappeared? Scott Eichner stopped shooting pipe.
Yeah.
And so, you haven't got him anymore. And it's great that you've got all these different voices and stuff here, but without having like a consolidated business where you can actually pay people and have professional people devote their whole time to it. It's just a hobby,
right,
for everyone then, and you don't get that same progression.
Yeah. Well, I guess ultimately what it comes down to is what we were talking about earlier, is that the business model needs to adapt. And if the WSL's and Dirk Ziff's investment was specifically in reaching that huger audience and becoming kind of a larger sporting entity that's recognized around the world, I think you can objectively measure that right now and say that it's been a failure. And that's really scary. That's a scary proposition. But what else has happened, I think, in the interim, as they've been kind of struggling to figure that out, is it's left room for Stab to do Surf 100. It's left room for smaller, more nimble entities to rethink the model completely and say, hey, we got to charge $15. And even then, nobody's going to really get rich doing it, but we all like this thing that is competitive surfing. So let's offer it in a new medium for $15. And I don't know whether or not they covered their costs on that, but I thought that I loved the format. I loved that there was only 4 people. I loved that they ran it in pumping surf on the best day of the year. You know, there was a lot of successes with it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like, you know, I suppose you can equate a little way into what happened with the surf industry as well. When it blew up at the end of the 2000s, you kind of went from it was like a dinosaur mammal kind of thing. So you had, suddenly it didn't pay to be big. And the people that succeeded were small and furry and smart and got around and did interesting shit and found little niches and evolved into those. And maybe that's where we're at, you know?
Yeah. What surf media do you follow nowadays?
Not a lot. To be honest, I certainly haven't been watching or reading much at all lately. I like Swellnet here in Australia. Like, I actually work for the opposition. I work for Coastal Watch. But I like Stuart Swellnet. He's good. Chaz and Derek, I like reading Beach Grit for, it's like a guilty pleasure. I'll read a little bit of that. A bit of Stab, but that's really kind of about it. I'll pick the Journal up when I can get a copy. It's a bit hard to get here in Australia, but that's really, I tend not to read too much around it, because it just, you end up, I'm spinning my wheels in it most days anyway.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to do in my spare time is go back and read some more of it.
Totally. Will we be able to get Surfing World here subscription wise?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we'll support it if we can.
I'll probably do a digital subscription at some point when I get organized. But at the moment, I'm just scratching to get a mag together. Like that's it. That's
crazy. That's speaking of following surf media, did you catch Jay Davies' recent edit the last few days?
He's a freak.
I mean, the guy's a kingpin.
Yeah, he's gnarly. Yeah, and they've had the maddest run. Like WA, well, we had really good waves here in autumn. They had good waves. But they've also had the mad winter as well, and so he's just been on a burner. But yeah, like what's Davies now? Davies would be early 30s.
Yeah,
like he's kind of getting on a bit, man. But he's like, I don't think he's peaked.
Well, I thought that he had, by the fact that he was working a day job on as a tugboat operator, and then they drop that edit, and it's like, you're right. This edit is peak. Not only peak Davies. I mean, this might be the peak edit that I've seen in years. The guy's gnarly. Like everything from Big Surf to airs, and he's got so much muscle that a lesser, a more feeble man would not be able to do what he does. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. It's next level. It's Geordie kind of to the next level almost.
Totally. I watched that. Like, there's been a few of those, like the Carl Walsh one at the start of the year I watched as well. And that was like, there's been a few of those, like Jack Robbo's B clip, his snapped B clip that dropped during the week. Like, that was nuts.
Yeah.
Like, so there's, it's the upside, I suppose, of being at home being stuck at home for a year.
Or there's something in the water in Western Australia, because all three of those guys you just named are all from there.
Oh man.
How do you manage your relationship with surfing, with the workload that you have working for 22 different companies?
Oh, far. You don't surf enough. I kind of got lucky with COVID in that when we had that mad run here through autumn, I surfed for 8 weeks straight, and then my body just gave out. I did a hamstring. But we were lucky because we had a really shitty winter anyway. So I kind of buckled down through winter, and but you just got to be disciplined. You know, I'm lucky I'm like 2 minutes away from the surf here. So if I'm going to surf, I'm in and out and back. And then in terms of jumping between the other stuff, I just got to work in hour blocks and be disciplined. Hour on this, and you know, and as soon as the clock ticks, jump onto the next.
How many hours a day you reckon you're working, and how many days a week are you surfing?
I'm not surfing enough at the moment. Probably 3 days a week surfing, because we're surf just hasn't been there. It's onshore and terrible today. But probably average week, probably 4 or 5 surfs, I think.
Okay.
Average it over the year. Yeah. And I get up, but I do this thing where I get up at like 4 in the morning and write. Because my biggest, like the biggest problem is your fucking phone and emails. It's just like, because there's so many, they just keep churning, and unless you break from that, you can't do quality time with anything. So I get up at 4 o'clock. If I need my writing hours, just do 4 to 7.
That's discipline, man. So how do you manage personal relationships? Do you have time for your personal relationships then?
I haven't seen my kids in 4 years, but well, personal relationships are easy at the moment because we're all stuck in the one fucking house. So we're all here.
Yeah, but if you're up writing at that time, and then, I mean, you got to, yeah.
I know it is, yeah. But you figure, I've spoken to a few people, and they ask how old you are, and they go, well, yes, you are. I've got some older mentors, some people I speak to regularly who kind of run me, and they go, well, these are years, you're in your 40s, these are years you should be doing shit.
Yeah. Good.
This is time. And I look at my life, and the first third of my life I did fuck all. I just surfed. And I figured if I can make my middle third really productive, and then I'll take a break later.
Well, that's what's funny is I would never worry about you not getting things done. What I would worry about for you is not taking time off, like not actually spending time with your loved ones, or like making time, or surfing enough or whatever. And so it was funny that you said, I have to be disciplined about it. You were talking about being disciplined about going surfing. You weren't talking about being disciplined about going writing. You're saying I have to force myself to be disciplined to make sure I go play outside, So your mentors need to make sure you're getting outside, not getting more writing done.
Well, you got the other thing you got to be disciplined with, because I'm a New South Welshman, and so I grew up on the North Coast. Like, the discipline here is throwing yourself into the ocean here in August in the middle of winter.
Right.
That takes a bit of intestinal fortitude for a New South Welshman.
Yeah. Whose boards are you riding? Do you get boards from Maurice at all, or what do you? I think you were riding a DHD last time I saw you.
Yeah, mate, I can't get on Maurice's list. It's
really?
It's like, and I actually feel bad, because when I live with him here, he'd sit there and he'd get another order, and he'd almost grumble. He'd go, "Oh, it's like another burden. I've got to get this thing done." It's like, because he's so big-hearted, he feels he has to do it.
Yeah.
And I felt like, man, I don't want to add to this guy's misery. It's like, I don't want to give him another order when he doesn't want it. So I'm currently on a busted set of boards. I lost a few during autumn, but I've got an FCD, a Fletcher Chenard. I've got a JS, and I've got one on order from Sharma Buttonshaw down here.
Epic. What are you getting from him?
I'm going to get a longer kind of performance twin. He's shaping some wild shit.
Yeah.
Some really good stuff. So he's been riding this glider all of winter, this 12-foot. It's basically, it's halfway between a longboard and a rhino chaser.
Yeah.
But he's been riding that all winter, and so he's kind of out there in the fringes of the cosmos. But I want something. Yeah, I told him to shape me something for Bells and Winky with a ton of foam in it.
So and it's a twin.
Yeah.
Interesting. Pointy nose.
Yeah, it's kind of a little hybridy, but essentially, yeah, it'll be pointy.
How long?
I think I asked for 6'6".
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, kept tabs on his boards for the last year or two. They look really, really awesome. I'm a big
Yeah,
fan.
yeah. And you want, like, the thing is for down here, it's a really specific wave. Like,
Yeah.
other boards tend not to work for down here. If you bought an East Coast board here, they're going to struggle because it's the nature of the wave. There's no bottom to the wave. They're big open face. So I'm just lucky there's a ton of good shapers here in town. So
Awesome. Well, what do I tell people to do to support Surfing World?
if you're in Australia, get out and subscribe. Keep the dream alive. That's again, I reckon this COVID period has given people a new appreciation for the smaller things in life. Like, I think a lot of the bigger things have struggled through this, but a lot of the smaller things, and this is our thinking. Yeah, we just hope it connects.
Yeah.
And this little thing that we're doing in my shitty little back room here, and actually Frank's in Mallorca at the moment, and so we're doing the magazine. I'm here, he's stuck in Spain.
Oh my gosh.
And we're doing this little backyard project, which we're hoping is going to be is going to keep it keep the oldest surf mag in the world alive.
Well, let me know anything I can do to support, man. I want to see it. I want to see it in print here too. I want physical copies.
I will send you a copy, David, and I'll send you your Rashi back. You left it in the back of my truck.
I know I did. You should have given it away to somebody. I don't know if I told you, but that waiter at that restaurant, he was frothing to surf. I feel like he was my size. You could have just handed it off to him.
Yeah, pass it along. Yeah,
exactly. Right on. Well, thanks so much, Sean. Great catching up.
Always, mate. Yep. What's on for the rest of the day? What time you got? You're late arvo there, huh?
It's 6:20 in the evening, so I've got to take the puppy for a walk and start cooking.
Yeah, I'm going surfing.
Nice. Enjoy.
Good on you, Dave.
All right, man. You too. Thanks.
All the best, mate.